The secret base Russia buried under 2 feet of concrete in a location they believe no living Ukrainian intelligence officer would ever find was destroyed by a drone on a Tuesday morning, and Moscow did not say a single word about it publicly for days. That silence is the most important thing happening in this war right now. Not the strike itself, the silence afterward. Because when a nuclear-capable missile storage facility gets hit inside territory that Vladimir Putin has spent 12 years telling the world is permanently, irrevocably, eternally Russian, and the Kremlin says nothing, it means the damage was real, the humiliation was total, and the strategic implications are ones Russia cannot afford to let the world examine too closely. By the time you finish watching this, you will understand not just what Ukraine destroyed on April 28, 2026, but why those strikes form a single coherent architecture, a blueprint for taking back a peninsula without firing a conventional ground offensive, and why the detail buried inside this story, the one almost nobody in Western media has connected properly, changes everything we thought we understood about how this war ends. Let us go back to 2014. Not to the political headlines, not to the diplomatic outrage, but to the specific moment when Vladimir Putin made a calculation. He had just taken Crimea. He had absorbed it into Russia through a combination of military occupation, a staged referendum that Western governments universally rejected, and the kind of swift, decisive action that his advisors had been telling him for years he was capable of. The world protested. Sanctions landed, but Crimea stayed Russian, and Putin leaned back and did the arithmetic. Ukraine was too weak, too fractured, too dependent on Western goodwill that would eventually fade. Russia had the Black Sea Fleet anchored at Sevastopol. Russia had the Kerch Bridge in construction, which would open in 2018 and physically connect the peninsula to the Russian mainland. Russia had Iskander missile systems, some of the most lethal tactical ballistic weapons in any military's arsenal, stored in facilities across the peninsula, including in Cold War-era bunkers that had been built specifically to survive a nuclear exchange. Putin drove across the Kerch Bridge personally when it opened in 2018. He sat behind the wheel of a truck, led a convoy of construction vehicles across 12 miles of strait, and looked into the camera with the expression of a man who has written something in stone. This is Russia. This will always be Russia. Nothing you do will change this. That was the calculation. That was the line drawn. And for years, the calculation looked correct. Ukraine was fighting a grinding war in Donbass. Its military was rebuilding slowly. Its drone capability was in its infancy. Its navy was outmatched by Russia's Black Sea Fleet in every conventional metric. Crimea looked untouchable. The bunkers beneath the soil near the village of Ovashy, approximately 40 kilometers east of occupied Simferopol, held Iskander missiles behind 60 centimeters of reinforced concrete, nearly 2 feet of solid Soviet-era engineering, covered with compacted earth on top, invisible from the air to anything except the most precise targeting intelligence. Russia did not publicize these facilities. Their locations were classified. Their existence was not acknowledged. They were the insurance policy, the hidden deterrent, the capability that Ukraine was simply not supposed to know about, and certainly not supposed to reach. On April 28, 2026, a Ukrainian drone reached it. The weapon almost certainly used was the FP2 produced by Firepoint, the same Ukrainian manufacturer behind the Flamingo drone missile hybrid system, as reported by New Voice of Ukraine. The FP2 is purpose-built for hardened targets. Its current warhead configuration carries 105 kilograms of explosive, 231 pounds, sufficient to penetrate the class of reinforced bunker that Russia had been relying on to keep its Iskander systems safe inside Crimea. And here is the detail that Putin should find genuinely alarming. Firepoint has already publicly announced a warhead upgrade for the FP2, bringing its payload to 150 kilograms in the near future. What destroyed that secret base on April 28th was not even the final version of the weapon. The next iteration hits harder. But before we go further into what Ukraine hit and why it matters, let's stop for 1 second and make sure the magnitude of what an Iskander missile actually represents is fully understood. The Iskander M ballistic missile has a maximum range of 500 kilometers, 311 miles. Stored in Crimea, that range envelope covers an enormous portion of Ukraine's most populated mainland territory. Kyiv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, all of it sits within reach of Iskander launches from the occupied peninsula. Russia has used these missiles throughout the full-scale war to strike Ukrainian cities, targeting energy infrastructure, civilian buildings, and military logistics hubs. They are not a secondary capability. They are one of Russia's primary tools of terror against the Ukrainian population. And then there is the version that gives the Iskander its deepest strategic weight. The Iskander M can be configured to carry a nuclear warhead. Let that sit for exactly 1 moment. Russia has been storing, inside a secret underground Soviet-era bunker in occupied Crimea, missiles physically capable of delivering a nuclear payload. Most credible analysts, and this view has been consistent across reporting by Reuters, the BBC, and Western defense think tanks, believe that actual nuclear warheads have not been positioned there. But the capability itself functions as a standing implied threat. Every Iskander on the peninsula is a reminder that Russia's nuclear option is never entirely theoretical, that Ukraine should calibrate its actions accordingly, that pushing too hard carries consequences that cannot be undone. That implied threat took a direct hit on April 28th. Ukraine found the secret base. Ukraine destroyed what was stored inside it. And Ukraine delivered a message to every defense planner in Moscow that their most carefully hidden deterrent infrastructure is neither as hidden nor as safe as the Kremlin believed. Stop right there for just a second, because what comes next is where this story stops being a collection of impressive strikes and starts being something far more important and far more dangerous for Russia. 4 days after the Ovashy strike, on May 2nd, 2026, Ukraine launched a follow-up operation specifically targeting Iskander systems in Crimea. Ukraine's defense forces struck an entire tactical group of Iskander missile launchers in an overnight operation, along with several radar installations across the peninsula. United 24 Media confirmed the details. 2 coordinated strikes against Iskander capabilities inside Crimea within 5 days. This is not coincidence. This is not opportunism born from a lucky intelligence tip. This is a methodical, sequenced campaign to strip Crimea of its offensive missile architecture, to transform the peninsula from Russia's most powerful launch platform against Ukrainian cities into something Russia can no longer use as a weapon. If those strikes continue at this pace and depth, the question that must be running through the Kremlin right now is the same question Ukraine wants Moscow asking. If we cannot safely operate our Iskanders from Crimea anymore, what strategic value does Crimea actually give us? And Ukraine is making sure the answer to that question keeps shrinking. If this analysis is cutting through the noise for you, like it, share it, subscribe, and tell me below. Do you think Ukraine can fully neutralize Russia's Iskander capability in Crimea before any ceasefire talks reach a critical stage? Now let's talk about the Kerch Bridge and April 30th, 2026. Because what Ukraine did in the Kerch Strait that night is the connector that makes the entire strategy visible, the single detail that snaps the whole architecture into focus. Ukraine's Navy posted a telegram announcement confirming strikes against Russian vessels operating in the Kerch Strait area. 2 vessels were hit. A patrol boat belonging to the FSB, Russia's Domestic Intelligence and Security Service, which operates a dedicated guard fleet protecting the bridge, and an anti-sabotage boat called the Grazia, whose specific operational purpose is intercepting and neutralizing waterborne threats to the bridge structure itself. Ukraine's Navy confirmed both vessels suffered what it described as irreparable losses, with casualties among crews. Now, Russia's instinctive response is to say, those were small boats, not the bridge. This changes nothing. That response is precisely the wrong way to analyze what just happened. Ukraine was not attempting to destroy the Kerch Bridge on April 30th. Ukraine was surgically removing the protective layer around the bridge, clearing the perimeter, eliminating the dedicated defensive screen that Russia positioned to intercept exactly the kind of maritime drone attacks that Ukraine has been perfecting and escalating throughout this war. You remove the guards before you move on the target. April 30th was about removing the guards. And this matters with a specific urgency when you understand what Ukraine can now send toward that bridge. The Sea Baby maritime drone, Ukraine's most significant naval surface weapon, received a major capability upgrade in October 2025, according to reporting tracked by Al Jazeera and confirmed by Ukrainian defense sources. Its payload capacity now stands at 2,000 kilograms, over 4,400 pounds of explosive. For context, in June 2025, Ukraine used more than 1,000 kilograms of explosives to mine the structural supports of the Kerch Bridge, causing confirmed damage. The Sea Baby can now carry double that payload. With the guard boats eliminated, with the defensive perimeter degraded, the maritime approach to the bridge is more open than it has been at any point since the full-scale invasion began. But here is what almost everyone gets wrong about the Kerch Bridge. And getting this wrong means missing the entire point of Ukraine's Crimea strategy entirely. Most analysis frames the Kerch Bridge as a military logistics asset, a route from moving Russian troops and equipment into Crimea and forward toward the front lines. And yes, that was Putin's original vision. Troops, tanks, ammunition, fuel, all flowing across 12 miles of strait, keeping the peninsula integrated into Russia's war machine. That plan collapsed years before these strikes. By May 2024, Russia had already stopped routing frontline military logistics across the Kerch Bridge. Ukraine's sustained pressure on Crimean supply routes had made it too exposed, too unreliable, too dangerous for high-volume military movement. The bridge lost its function as a military artery. But it did not lose its vital importance to Putin's control of Crimea. Because now, and this is the part that changes everything, the Kerch Bridge is a lifeline for people, specifically for Russian civilians. Since the illegal 2014 annexation, the Russian government actively encouraged its citizens to relocate to Crimea, offering preferential mortgage lending and economic incentives to accelerate what can only be described as demographic engineering. According to the Kyiv Independent, up to 800,000 Russian citizens had relocated to the peninsula by December 2023. Simultaneously, the Ukrainian population was pushed out. Fewer than 100,000 Ukrainians remained on the peninsula by that same period. Putin was Russifying Crimea, making it Russian not just on paper, not just administratively, but in population, culture, identity, and daily life. And that entire project rested on a single promise. Come here, Russia said. It is safe. It is protected. We will defend you. Live your lives. Ukraine is now dismantling that promise, strike by strike, layer by layer. The psychological campaign running beneath these military operations is the most unconventional and potentially most decisive element of the entire strategy. Ukraine is not targeting Russian civilians. President Zelensky is not Putin. Ukrainian military doctrine does not involve strikes on civilian populations. But what Ukraine is doing, with deliberate consistency, is destroying every military asset and infrastructure component that forms the operational basis of Putin's protection guarantee, and doing it in ways that every Russian civilian on the peninsula can observe and interpret. Every Iskander battery destroyed sends a message. Every air defense radar struck opens a hole in the shield. Every patrol boat sunk in the Kerch Strait is a sentence addressed directly to the Russian families living in Crimea. The bridge you would use to leave is within reach of weapons that now have fewer obstacles between them and its supports. People make rational calculations about personal safety. When those calculations change, when the place that was sold to them as safe starts visibly losing its defenses in real time, when the route back to the mainland starts looking vulnerable, people leave. Not because anyone forced them, because they chose to. And as Russian civilians make that choice and relocate to the mainland, the demographic engineering that Putin spent years constructing begins unwinding without Ukraine firing a single bullet at a civilian. This is where this strategy becomes genuinely historic in its conception. Here is the full architecture. Ukraine has been executing 3 simultaneous and mutually reinforcing phases. And the late April and early May strikes represent the acceleration of all 3 running in parallel. Phase 1 was the destruction of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, the naval shield that was supposed to make Crimea militarily impenetrable. Ukraine built maritime drone technology from almost nothing. It developed tactics with no historical precedent. And over the first years of the full-scale invasion, it sank or disabled approximately 1/3 of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, as confirmed by multiple independent assessments tracked by Reuters and the BBC. The fleet's Sevastopol headquarters became operationally untenable under Ukrainian strike pressure. Putin was forced to relocate surviving vessels to Novorossiysk on the Russian mainland, a position significantly less capable of projecting power into the Black Sea, and far less effective as a defensive screen for Crimea. Phase 1 stripped the first and outermost layer of Crimea's protection. Phase 2 is the sustained, escalating degradation of Crimea's fixed military infrastructure. The ongoing campaign we have been watching accelerate throughout 2026. Air defense systems struck relentlessly, with barely a week passing without confirmed Ukrainian hits against radar installations or surface-to-air batteries across the peninsula. April 29th alone saw Ukraine strike an MR-10 radar installation, a separate air defense system, and a Crimean fuel depot in a single night of coordinated operations, according to Ukrainian Defense Ministry reporting. Every air defense system destroyed does 2 things simultaneously. It opens an aerial corridor that Ukraine's drones can exploit for deeper penetration on the next mission, and it signals to everyone under that protection, soldiers and civilians alike, that the defensive roof is thinning. The Iskander strikes fit directly into this phase. Finding and destroying a classified Cold War bunker full of nuclear-capable ballistic missiles is not a tactical, opportunistic success. It is evidence that Ukraine's intelligence penetration of Russian-controlled Crimea has reached a depth that Moscow's security services cannot contain. Phase 3 is the psychological operation, the campaign that does not appear in weapons inventories, but may ultimately prove the most decisive. It runs continuously beneath and through the military strikes, amplifying their impact with every announcement, every telegram post, every confirmed hit. Russia has approximately 32,500 troops stationed in Crimea, according to estimates consistent across Western defense analysis, positioned to defend against a conventional ground assault that Ukraine has no intention of attempting. Those soldiers are watching against an attack that will not come from the direction they are guarding, while the actual campaign dismantles the peninsula's defenses from the air and sea, in domains where ground forces are operationally irrelevant. 32,000 soldiers cannot intercept a drone swarm. They cannot stop a sea baby crossing the Kerch Strait at night. They provide no protection against an FP2 that has already found its target inside a classified bunker. Russia has deployed the correct answer to the wrong question. And every resource committed to defending Crimea against a ground assault is a resource unavailable for the front lines in Donetsk. for defending Russian territory against Ukrainian long-range strikes, for protecting the energy infrastructure, funding the entire war machine. Putin is being forced to choose priorities across an increasingly fractured list of demands simultaneously. Now let us bring this completely together, because the picture it creates is more coherent and more remarkable than any individual element suggests. Ukraine began by destroying Russia's ability to project naval power from Crimea. The fleet retreated. The waters around the peninsula shifted in Ukraine's operational favor, in ways that would have been unimaginable on February 23, 2022. Ukraine then turned systematically to Crimea's air defense network, the layer protecting everything beneath it, and began the methodical work of creating gaps, corridors, and vulnerabilities that each subsequent wave of strikes could exploit more deeply than the last. Through those corridors, Ukrainian drones found the Cold War nuclear-era bunker holding Iskander missiles that Russia's classification system had kept hidden for years, and destroyed what was inside it with a warhead designed specifically for hardened concrete. 5 days later, Ukraine hit Iskander capabilities again to ensure the message arrived. Meanwhile, the guard fleet protecting the Kerch Bridge was removed from the equation. The maritime approach opened. The Sea Baby, now carrying 2,000 kilograms of payload, has fewer obstacles between it and the bridge supports than at any previous point in this war. And every Russian civilian on the peninsula watched the announcement about those guard boats and ran the same calculation. The bridge they rely on to leave is becoming more vulnerable. The weapons protecting them are being destroyed. The promise they were given is expiring in real time. Ukraine's long-term calculation for Crimea is patient, methodical, and increasingly credible. It does not require a dramatic ground assault in the near term. It requires holding Russian forces on the mainland under sustained pressure, inflicting the casualty rates and territorial attrition that Western reporting through CNN, The Wall Street Journal, and BBC has been tracking throughout 2026, until the overall balance shifts far enough that Russia faces a genuine strategic withdrawal. When that moment arrives, Ukraine will be moving into a Crimea that has been systematically prepared for their arrival. Iskander batteries degraded or eliminated, air defense networks gutted, Russian civilian population significantly reduced through voluntary relocation, Kerch Bridge reliability compromised by repeated structural attacks. A Ukrainian force entering that environment would be entering a peninsula that no longer has the defensive depth it had in February 2022. And there is a scenario even beyond that. If Russia's mainland military position deteriorates sufficiently, the 32,500 troops stationed in Crimea to guard against a ground assault may find themselves cut off, undersupplied, and facing a choice that no commander wants to face. Fight on without reinforcement, or negotiate an exit through a bridge that Ukraine has been targeting for years. Under those circumstances, Russia's garrison in Crimea transforms from a strategic asset into a liability. A large, expensive force that Moscow cannot feed, reinforce, or easily extract. Putin drew a line in 2014 and told the world it was permanent. The secret base at Ovashy is burning. The guard boats in the Kerch Strait are gone. The Black Sea Fleet is in Novorossiysk. The air defenses are thinning. The Russian civilians are watching and calculating. And Ukraine's drone program is producing weapons with warheads still being upgraded. Meaning what comes next is more capable than what just hit those bunkers. History does not move in straight lines, but it does move. And right now, it is moving in a direction that Putin's 2014 calculation did not account for. At a speed that the Kremlin has no clear answer to, through methods that 32,500 soldiers standing on the Perekop Isthmus cannot stop. Ukraine is not asking for Crimea back. Ukraine is taking it back, one layer at a time, one strike at a time, with the patience and precision of a country that spent 12 years thinking about exactly this problem and is now solving it in real time. The verdict is being written in the sky above Simferopol, in the waters of the Kerch Strait, and in the silence from Moscow that follows every strike they cannot explain and dare not acknowledge. That silence is the most important sound in this war, and it is getting louder. If this gave you the full picture that mainstream coverage is missing, like it, share it, subscribe, and tell me below. Which phase of Ukraine's Crimea strategy do you think will prove most decisive? The naval campaign, the air defense destruction, or the psychological pressure on Russian civilians?